February 1st, 1959, 3:47 a.m. The last entry in a weather-stained diary reads, "We are leaving the tent. Something is forcing us out." Just like that, 9 voices vanish into the white. But before that line, before the ink froze and the pen slipped from numb fingers, there was warmth. Clear's throat, there was laughter, and we are rewinding back to the very first minute of February 1st, when the mountain still felt like a friend. I can almost taste the chocolate they passed around, the kind that cracks like thin ice and melts on the tongue while the kettle hisses beside the stove. Igor writes about it in blocky pencil, half Russian, half joke. Dubinina stole the last square. Typical. The tent is a cocoon of orange lamplight, nylon walls trembling with every gust, yet inside it feels like a living room. Boots hang in pairs, ice crystals sparkling like cheap chandeliers. Someone hums a song from the canteen back in Sverdlovsk, off-key but comforting. And outside, the wind carries its own low note, a steady, almost electronic hum that none of them can place. They joke it must be the radio, but the radio is switched off. Soviet radio logs from the same hour record something stranger, a sudden spike in static so sharp it clipped the needles of the receivers in Ivdel, 60 kilometers away. The operator scribbled, "Source unknown, mountain interference," then underlined the question twice. Inside the tent, no one hears that bureaucratic puzzlement. They only hear each other, trading stories about parents, about exams failed, and kisses stolen. Zolotaryov, the oldest, tells them about the war, how frostbite feels like fire before it feels like nothing. The youngsters groan, not another war story, but they listen anyway, because the night is endless and the summit is tomorrow. Midnight melts toward 1 o'clock. The chocolate is gone, wrappers folded into tiny paper cranes and tucked into a tin. Someone, Kolevatov, I think, unwraps a mandarin orange, the scent cutting through kerosene and wet wool like a memory of summer. The hum outside grows louder, threading itself between their words until conversation stumbles. They grow quiet, listening. It is not the wind. Wind howls. This drones, steady and metallic, as though the mountain itself has a turbine buried deep beneath the snow. "Do you hear it?" whisper. Lyudmila whispers. No one answers at first. Then Thibault, yes, the Joker, says it's probably just the spirit of the pass, cranky about tourists. The tension breaks. They laugh too loudly, relieved. But diaries do not lie. Each of them records the same phrase, almost word for word. "The wind has a sound I cannot describe." And under that, a smudge where a pen paused, as though the writer waited for the noise to stop before daring another letter. Outside, the canvas flaps harder, a slow, deliberate whump, whump, like a warning hand against a drum. The stove flickers. Shadows lurch across nylon walls. For one heartbeat, the tent feels small, fragile, a paper lantern in a hurricane. Then the moment passes, the kettle whistles, and they settle into sleeping bags, still chuckling, still warm. Yet the Soviet logs keep ticking. At 12:34 a.m., the static vanishes. Needle drops to 0. Dead silence on every frequency. The operator writes, "Unnatural quiet," and signs his initials with a shaky hand. Inside the tent, the lamplight dims to a coal orange glow. One by one, pens cap, diaries close. The last conscious voice murmurs, "Tomorrow we stand on top of the world." And the mountain listens. But here's the thing. The diary that ends with "We are leaving" is not the last diary. There is another, smaller notebook tucked deep in a rucksack pocket, its pages still blank. Somewhere between the chocolate wrappers and the humming wind, time forks. One path leads to the famous tragedy we think we know. The other leads somewhere colder, somewhere the blizzard itself refuses to name. And I have seen the second path. Stay with me, because in 47 minutes the temperature will plummet 30 degrees, the tent will become a tomb, and the first boot will step into darkness. But before that step, before the footprints scatter like frightened birds, something else is already moving up the slope. Something that does not leave tracks. I'm still holding that last diary page in my mind when the ridge itself begins to mutter. The wind hasn't risen yet. No. This is deeper, like the mountain clearing its throat under 6 feet of snow. It starts at 6 minutes past 6, and every boot sole feels it. Igor writes in cramped Cyrillic, Niski gul, как будто земля вздыхает. Translation, a low sigh, as if the earth itself is tired of us. I can almost hear the graphite scrape. Zena snaps her notebook shut, the crack louder than any avalanche forecast. Temperature just kissed goodbye to 12 degrees, she says, breath fogging like cigarette smoke. We huddle, 9 silhouettes against a sky that refuses to blush. Sasha Kolevatov, ever the technician, taps the thermometer glass as though it might change its mind. It doesn't. The mercury keeps sinking, a diver who forgot how to swim back up. Radio static flickers in Yuri Yudin's mittened hand. He's supposed to be resting at base camp, but the receiver borrowed from the weather station 2 valleys over is still warm. A voice slices through the white noise. Unidentified atmospheric pressure anomaly. Repeat, anomaly moving north-northeast. The words taste metallic. We look at one another, pupils dilated like dark moons. Leota presses her mid to her lips, as if that could stop the secret from escaping. Igor argues they should descend, turn back, live to tell the tale in some smoky student cafe. But Gorgi, the geologist, stamps the slope and claims the snow here is stable enough to park a tank. I almost believe him, until the ridge groans again, lower, angrier. 20 minutes. That's how long it takes for the temperature to drop another dozen degrees. I count every second like rosary beads. We vote, hands red and trembling. 5 say push on to the tree line. 4, including me, say dig in right here. Igor breaks the tie with the kind of smile that doesn't reach his eyes. We camp, he says, but we keep the stove burning till sunrise. The relief is short-lived. The moment the tent pegs bite, the wind arrives, sharp as a scalpel. Inside, the canvas walls belly and suck like lungs. Someone hums a song, Sasha maybe, off-key, trying to stitch courage into the air. I thumb through the communal diary, looking for yesterday's warmth. Instead, I find a new line, scrawled in haste. The ridge is cracking, not snow, not ice, something underneath. The pen pressure almost tears the paper. Outside, the pressure drops so fast my ears pop. Yuri Yudin swears the radio just spoke again, clearer this time. Barometer 31.02 and falling. Visual contact impossible. Visual contact with one. The candle flame gutters, leans west then east, as though deciding which story to tell. I zip the tent flap, but the night shoulder rolls its way inside anyway. The last thing I hear before the recorder clicks off is Liuda whispering, "We should have gone down." Her voice is so soft it could be my own conscience. Then silence, thick enough to choke on. But silence never lasts up here. Somewhere beyond the nylon wall, something shifts, not snow sliding, not wind, a single, deliberate scrape, like a fingernail tracing glass. I count heartbeats, 1, 2, 3. On 4, the scrape stops. On 5, the tent fabric dimples inward, a ghost pressing its face to ours. I reach for the zipper. My fingers hesitate, hovering over metal teeth colder than regret. Do I open it? Do any of us? Because whatever made that sound isn't wind, isn't animal, isn't human, and it's already inside the story we thought we were writing. The candle dies, the ridge exhales, and in the sudden dark, I realize the diary is no longer blank, but the next page is missing. Torn clean out, just a jagged edge where tomorrow should begin. Torn clean out. I woke to the taste of copper pennies and a ringing that wasn't in my ears, but in the bones behind them. The tent walls were breathing, slow and deliberate, like something huge outside was deciding whether to inhale us whole. The zipper I'd been too terrified to touch now lay open, a crooked grin of frost crusted along its teeth. No one had opened it. No one remembered doing it, yet the flap was peeled back just enough for the morning to slip inside, pale and wrong. I checked my watch. Noon, though the sun hung low, a nickel pressed against white gauze. The others were already up, shuffling in that stiff-kneed way you move when the cold has filed your joints to knives. Igor squatted by the little barometer, lips moving silently as the needle quivered like a trapped moth. It had dropped the height of 500 meters in less than 30 seconds. I laughed because what else do you do when the sky forgets how to behave? Mountain sickness, I said, and the words tasted metallic, like the air itself was rusting on my tongue. Sasha handed me the camera. Take a picture before we forget what sane feels like. The shutter clicked, and in the brief flash, the snow looked violet, bruised, as if the world had been punched. We posed like tourists, arms around each other, cheeks already waxy with windburn. No one noticed that every compass in the camp was spinning, lazy circles, as though north had become a suggestion rather than a law. The metallic taste thickened. Zena pressed the back of her wrist to her mouth, eyes watering. It's like licking a battery, she whispered, and I thought of the radio we'd left behind at the last depot, the way its batteries had leaked acid into the snow. Something was leaking here, too, only we couldn't see it, couldn't bottle it. The mountain exhaled again, a low hum that lived in the fillings of my teeth. I told myself it was just pressure dropping, just altitude playing tricks, but my voice sounded thin, like a record played at the wrong speed. We decided to push on. The ridge above us curved like a question mark, and we were the dot beneath it, tiny and expendable. As we climbed, the snow began to hiss. Not wind, not voices, but a static that rose from the ground itself. Every footstep erased the one behind it. I tried to memorize the way back, but the prints filled themselves in faster than I could blink. The horizon tilted, not dramatically, just enough to make the blood rush to my temples like a warning. Halfway up, Yuri dropped to one knee, pressing his palms against his ears. "Do you hear that?" he asked. None of us did, until suddenly we all did. A frequency just below hearing, the kind that makes dogs howl and glass tremble. My vision fractured at the edges, little black commas floating across the snow. I raised the camera again, but the viewfinder showed only static, white noise made solid. The lens cap was off. The problem wasn't mechanical. We laughed again, brittle and too loud, because camaraderie is the last lie we tell ourselves before panic. Someone joked that the mountain wanted a group portrait, but its timing was off. The joke fell flat, skittering across the crust like a dropped coin. I noticed the other's pupils, blown wide, black coins in blue ice, the same dilation I'd seen in photographs of shell shock victims. We were still moving, still smiling for the camera that no longer worked, but inside, we were already scattering. The ridge leveled out into a small plateau ringed with wind-carved stone. Beyond it, the slope dropped into a bowl of perfect silence. No wind, no birds, not even the crunch of our boots. Just that metallic taste and the hum, growing warmer, intimate, like a mouth pressed to the back of my neck. I glanced at the barometer one last time. The needle had stopped spinning. It pointed straight down, as if gravity itself had changed its mind. Then the snow began to rise, not fall, rise. Tiny crystals lifting from the ground, hovering at waist height like a living constellation. They caught the sickly light and shimmered, not white, but the color of old television snow. I lifted my hand. The crystals parted around it, obedient, reverent. Somewhere behind me, Sasha whispered a single word I didn't catch, or maybe my ears refused to translate it. The divide was no longer invisible. It had simply turned itself inside out, and we were standing on the wrong side. I looked back for our footprints. There weren't any. Not a single dent. Just unbroken snow stretching to the tent, already a kilometer away and shrinking. The camera dangled from my wrist, lens cracked, film exposed to whatever light this place considered real. I pressed the shutter anyway. The click sounded like a bone snapping, and that's when the ridge began to hum a second note, lower, hungry, the sound of something enormous clearing its throat. We couldn't tell if it came from above us, below us, or from the spaces between our own heartbeats. The crystals swirled faster, forming a corridor of glittering teeth. One step forward, and the mountain would swallow. One step back, and, well, the footprints were gone. There was no back. I felt the diary in my pocket, the torn edge of the missing page brushing my thumb like a splinter. Whatever came next, the paper already knew, and it had chosen silence. The corridor of teeth closed behind us with a sigh that sounded almost human. I remember thinking, absurdly, that the mountain was apologizing. Sorry, no refunds, no returns. Then the wind hit. Not the polite, flirtatious gust that had toyed with our jacket hoods all afternoon, but a solid wall of moving ice that punched the breath out of my lungs and kept punching. 35 meters per second. I know because Zena wrote it down in the margin of her diary in letters so sharp they cut the page. Wind 35. No exclamation mark. She was past exclaiming. Inside the tent, the air went suddenly soft, like a theater when the lights drop. The canvas walls billowed, then sucked inward, a lung trying to decide whether to inhale forever or simply collapse. Our little stove hissed once and died. I reached for the matches. Stupid. The phosphorus scraped off uselessly against the striking strip. And that was when the vestibule buckled. Not tore, buckled. The way a knee buckles before the body understands it's falling. Snow poured in, not flakes, but slabs, each one the size of a suitcase. We used our ski poles like spears, jabbing at the avalanche that had apparently RSVP'd to dinner. Igor started counting under his breath. 1, 2, 3, the way you count contractions or artillery shells. At 7 he stopped, because the 7th slab landed on his boots and stayed there. We pulled the drawstrings so tight the cords cut our gloves. Outside, the radio crackled. Not our radio. Ours had given up hours ago, but something distant bleeding through the static like a ghost on a landline. A voice, male, calm, professional. The kind that reads weather bulletins and obituaries with the same cadence. Avoid Sector 1079. Repeat, avoid Sector 1079. Then, nothing but white noise that somehow felt louder than the wind. None of us asked what Sector 1079 was. We knew. We were sitting in it, zipped up like letters inside an envelope addressed to nowhere. The diaries changed tone right then. You can feel it when you read them later. The moment enthusiasm turns into inventory. Ludmila's entry shrank to 2 words, ears ringing. She underlined ringing 3 times, the pen pressing so hard, the paper bruised. Slobodin drew a small square and shaded it darker and darker until the graphite tore through. No one wrote, "I'm scared." That would have been redundant. The tent itself was screaming for us. Nylon fibers vibrating at a frequency that made teeth itch. We tried to shore up the vestibule with skis and a spare rope, but the rope just hummed like a violin string. Every knot we tied was undone by the wind before we could tighten it. Somebody, I think it was Kolovatov, started laughing, a thin, hysterical sound that sliced through the roar. We came all this way, he said, to build a snowdrift indoors. Nobody answered. The invisible line between courage and absurdity had already snapped, and we were falling on the absurd side, flailing like cartoon characters who haven't noticed the cliff is gone. I checked my watch, 8:17, and realized the second hand wasn't moving. Battery frozen, or time itself had given up. I tucked the diary back inside my jacket, closer to my heart than any love letter had ever been. The torn edge of the missing page pricked my skin like it wanted back in. Maybe the mountain had taken the rest of the story and left only the part that hurt to hold. We arranged ourselves shoulder to shoulder, 9 bodies forming a single organism wrapped in down and denial. Igor insisted on keeping the radio on, even though it spat nothing but static, as if the patrolman might come back and say, "Sorry, wrong address. Carry on." The wind found the gap between the ground sheet and the snow wall and began to play it like a flute. That note again, low, hungry, the one we'd heard at noon, now pressed against the floor of the tent, vibrating up through our spines. I felt it in the hollow of my throat, a second heartbeat that wasn't mine. Zena whispered, "If we fall asleep, we might not wake up." Nobody argued. The danger line wasn't outside anymore. It was inside, threading itself between our sleeping bags, curling around our ankles like a cat that had decided to stay. We zipped the inner flaps, then unzipped them again, unable to decide if we needed more air or less. Outside, the moon vanished. Inside, the darkness became absolute, the kind of dark that has weight and temperature. I thought about the diary entry we hadn't written yet. Entry 21, midnight, still alive. But even as the words formed in my head, the pen began to shake. and I realized the mountain was already writing the next line for us. And we weren't going to like the ending. The pen stopped shaking because the paper itself began to tremble, as though the words were trying to crawl away before I could pin them down. The tent walls flexed inward, then snapped out again, like lungs that had forgotten how to breathe. My watch read 03:30, but the hands were lying. Time felt thicker, syrup slow, yet racing past us at the same instant. Someone whispered heat behind me, the syllable cracking in the middle like thin ice, and I tasted copper on my tongue, though I had not bitten anything. Then came the roar. Not wind, not avalanche, more like the mountain clearing its throat directly into our ears. It started low, almost polite, then rose to a pitch that made the lantern filament glow white and the batteries sweat acid. Igor's diary slid from his lap. The last coherent sentence he ever wrote lay face up like a confession. Eyes burning, can't look away. The ink was still wet, yet the paper smoked, curling at the edges as if the words themselves were on fire. We all stared at it, 9 statues exhaling frost, until Yudmila broke the spell by laughing, a small, broken sound that ended in a sob. She pressed her palms to her temples and said the stars were inside her skull, flickering. That was when the Soviet radio on the supply sled crackled to life, one final time, spitting a pure 2,000 hertz tone that drilled straight through bone. No voice followed, no call sign, just the carrier wave holding a single, impossible note for 7 heartbeats before collapsing into absolute silence. The dial light winked out like a dying ember, and we realized we had never told base camp we were afraid. Then the tent tore, not from the outside, from within. A straight slash, shoulder height, as though someone inside had drawn a knife through buttered silk. Cold rushed in like water through a ruptured dam, and the temperature dropped 20 degrees between one heartbeat and the next. No one screamed. Instead, we filed out, calm as parishioners leaving midnight mass. The footprints began right there, in the spilled lantern glow. 9 sets, some barefoot, toes splayed wide, as if feeling for solid ground that was no longer there. The snow was so cold it squeaked beneath our weight, a high, bird-like cry that followed us into the dark. I remember thinking, absurdly, that the mountain was gossiping about us with every step. The moon had vanished, yet the slope was lit by a color that does not exist in daylight, a violet so deep it felt like drowning in ink. Ahead, the tree line waited like a row of teeth, and behind us the tent collapsed softly, as though the mountain had exhaled and decided not to inhale again. My watch froze at 03:47. The second hand twitched once, then gave up. I felt the last sentence of our story press against my teeth, desperate to be spoken, but when I opened my mouth, only frost came out. Now the footprints stop, and the wind picks up their echoes like breadcrumbs. I stand at the threshold between the known and the unwritten, coat flapping, skin already numb. Somewhere ahead, the others wait, unless they have already stepped beyond waiting, and the mountain holds its breath to hear what I will decide. I take one step forward, then another, and the snow closes behind me as neatly as a book snapping shut. The next page is blank, but the ink is coming. The snow that swallowed my last footprint is already smoothing itself, like a tongue licking a wound. I can't tell where my boot ended and the mountain began, only that the boundary no longer matters. Somewhere behind me, the tent sags under fresh weight, canvas sighing the way lungs do when the air inside turns to ice. I keep walking because stopping feels like giving the story permission to close. Ahead, the slope tilts upward into a white so pure it hums. The wind has learned my name, but it refuses to speak it aloud. Instead, it hisses through the hood of my parka, like a secret trying to escape. I reach the spot where the diaries end. The pages lie scattered, stiff as starched linen, each one stopped mid-thought. One reads, "The cold feels almost, then nothing." Another, "If we reach the summit by," then a smear of blue ink turned to frost. They were writing to us, but the mountain edited the script. I kneel, careful not to breathe on the evidence, and tuck the nearest sheet inside my coat. The paper burns against my chest like a guilty confession. Radio logs went dark at 3:48 exactly. I still hear the last transmission when I close my eyes. Static, a cough, then a single syllable that might have been help, or simply the wind learning human speech. Up here, every sound becomes suspect. My own pulse sounds like distant boots crunching. I turn, half expecting to see the other 8 climbing behind me, cheeks glittered with rhyme, eyes wide with a joke only they understand. But the slope is empty, except for the wind rearranging its furniture. I crest the final rise. The summit is a bare table set for ghosts. Snow sits in perfect dunes, untouched since the sky last exhaled. I count 9 hollows where bodies will later be found, arranged, some will say, like petals around an absent flower. I don't see them yet, but I feel their outlines, the way you feel a memory before the photograph develops. The silence here is so complete, it has weight. It presses against my eardrums like deep water. I speak, just to prove sound still belongs to me. We made it, I say, and the words fall straight down, too heavy to carry. The mountain does not echo. It absorbs. It files my voice under evidence. I unzip my coat and release the diary page I stole. The wind snatches it, folds it, hides it again somewhere I will never find. Good. Let the story stay unfinished. That is the only mercy this place offers. A sudden hush, deeper than before, tells me night is tilting toward dawn. I turn to leave, but my tracks are already gone. The mountain has erased me, the way a dream forgets the dreamer. I understand now. We were never the protagonists. We were punctuation marks the summit decided to delete. I stand still, letting the cold braid itself into my bones, and I wait for the mountain to speak. It never does. 9 bodies will be found weeks later, arranged with a patience no human could manage. The rescuers will wonder why one hiker carried a notebook page pressed against his heart, blank except for a single smudge of blue. They will never know I left it there, a period at the end of a sentence the mountain refused to finish. I was the last to see the summit whole, and the first to forget my own name on it. I close my eyes. The wind settles like a verdict. Somewhere far below, a radio crackles once, then sleeps forever. I open my mouth to say goodbye, but the mountain has already turned the page. Fade to white,